Welcome.
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 Welcome to Startup Central Victoria.
This is an exciting and collaborative journey.
Creating and growing businesses in the region.
Together we can learn to work and support each other.
We look forward to hearing more about your business ideas.
And thank you for your commitment to our region.
This is a wonderful, exciting time for businesses. We know you've been through a lot and we're really looking forward to working together with you as a region.
And finally, can I say that entrepreneurial spirit and commitment leads to transformational change. What a great thing. Thank you.
So, welcome everybody. My name is Kerry Anderson from Startup Centre Victoria, if you don't already know who I am. The aim of Startup Centre Victoria is to share knowledge to grow businesses in the region, whether they're startups or scale-ups. And we are very grateful for the support of the Digital Innovation Festival and La Trobe University's Innovation and Entrepreneurship team for putting on tonight's session. I would like to start by acknowledging and extending my appreciation for the traditional owners of the land. In Central Victoria, we are meeting on Yorta Yorta, Dja Dja Wurrung and Tangarung country, but I'm guessing that a few of you may be from outside those regions, perhaps on other traditional lands. So if you'd like to acknowledge them, please put them in the chat box. So this evening, we have a great conversation and a learning opportunity for you. The topic is technical development for early stage founders. And I'm really pleased that we have three fantastic presenters that are going to take us through this learning journey this evening. And it is a clinical workshop. I'm going to let them explain the format to you. But Pam, Maurice and Anthony from uSpark, welcome. I'd like you to tell us a little bit more about yourselves, and I'm going to hand over to you and soak up this wonderful knowledge along with everyone else. Thank you.
So we're just waiting for, I think Anthony is going to bring up our screen. Great. And so we've got our face page there. And we'll head into a bit of an intro. I'm the manager of uSpark. And Maurice and Anthony are advisors to uSpark. They are both specialists in the product and solution design area, and I'm an expert in innovation. We work for, as I mentioned, uSpark. uSpark is the corporate accelerator of Unico Computer Systems, which is an IT services company that's been around for about 38 years. I'll let Maurice and Anthony tell you a little bit more about themselves. So maybe if you want to just say a few words, Maurice first.
Sure. Good evening all. A little bit about myself would probably start by being in the IT game for over 20 years. In that time, I've had the privilege of working with some of the largest brands in the world, and that includes PwC, Toyota and Victoria Government, to name a few. I've had the opportunity to work with respective hothouses and accelerators to mentor numerous startups with technical challenges in that time. And today I'm excited to be sharing a number of tips that I've learned along the way and hope that they can help you too. Cheers.
Oh, sorry, as I find my unmute button. So, hi everyone, I'm Anthony. I've been doing tech since I learned to program on a Commodore 64 back in the 80s. So I suppose that kind of dates me a little bit. I've worked in small companies with just a handful of people. I've worked in super large international conglomerates turning over in excess of 70 odd billion a year. At the moment, I'm heading up a design team within the solution design function at Unico, alongside, I suppose, providing advisory services into uSpark. We're in the process of integrating into CGI. So I'm going back from I suppose, a 200-person company back into an 80,000 people company again. So I'm sitting backwards and forwards, almost between the two ends of the spectrum.
Fantastic. Thanks for that. If we can move on to the next slide, I think that will cover today's agenda. So we're going to be breaking up the workshop into 2 sections. The first section is going to cover the basics about the types of tech problems which we have found and are usually experienced by founders and startups, like, for instance, finding the right tech partners, understanding what is meant by fit for purpose, how to validate, how to design for scale and build for the current situation for now, meeting security, compliance and other legal needs, and of course the all-important getting free stuff. Then in the second part of the workshop, we'll be moving on to conducting a clinic where you can ask specific questions about the tech problems that you're encountering now. We're giving you a little bit of a context to this in the first half so that you can sort of get a sense of the types of problems that, you know, may be something that you need to think about and that you might want to sort of ask some further questions about. And in terms of the way that we're going to run the clinic, we'll have a little break before we get started. There'll be a Q&A about the basics. Then we'll start triaging your tech issues and questions. And what we'd encourage you to do is to please be prepared to share, because the more you do, the more that we're going to potentially learn from the experience. So I think we'll move on to the next panel.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to use a couple of tools to help us out this evening. And one of the tools we're going to use is a web application called Slido. We're going to run a couple of polls because we'd like to get, I suppose, a little bit of an understanding of who's in our audience and where you're at. And there's also a Q&A function in there. If you want to post in questions, we've also got the Zoom chat. We'll be trying to monitor both. So if you got a question that comes up along the way, feel free to jump it in the chat or use the raise hand function. Anything we can kind of explain along the way, we will. Anything that's going to involve a bit more of a detailed explanation, what we'll do is we'll park it and we'll cover it off in the section in between I suppose, doing the groundwork and the basics and the actual free-form workshop and the second half of the platform. So if you want to jump onto that, let's jump into our first poll. It's a little bit of a getting to know you. What we'd like to know is, what stage is your startup currently in? Are you at the idea stage? Are you still trying to formulate what is this actual thing that I'm thinking about and I need to be able to articulate it? Have you gone beyond that and you're building a business case? If you got a business case worked out, you go, yep, I'm actually starting to build an MVP, trying to test the waters, maybe do a pilot with a small group of people. Or have you gone beyond that and I'm at launch, I'm trying to get to market, I'm trying to learn how to scale, I'm trying to be big. Yeah. So we'll just give everyone a minute or so to just try and jump online. Please do pop in the chat or raise a hand if you're having problem accessing this platform. Well, should have put a countdown timer on this slide. Getting some responses. People are getting in. I think that means we've got 10 answers so far.
It looks like it, and a fairly fair spread.
Fairly fair spread. Bunch of people in the MVP stage. It's good, just trying to build something. Can someone tell me how many participants we have? I don't actually see that because I've got all the screen shares on at the moment.
24 from what I can see.
24. All right, so excluding us.
I was going to say, minus us.
So we probably got most of the people who've managed to get on and press an option.
It looks like an overwhelming number on an MVP at the moment, equally spread between idea and launch and scale, with only a very small percentage there on business case.
Yeah. To be honest, that's actually a very common pattern that we see across startups. The idea and the business case very quickly merge into each other, and you say, I've got an idea, I'm pretty sure I can make some money out of that, and I can make more than my cost, so let's get into building something. Oh, and then the business case becomes something that evolves a bit more through the MVP phase in parallel rather than being fully fleshed out up front. So don't be worried that you don't have a fully built out business case if you're also building an MVP. As long as you've got an idea that you're going to need to model income and costs and how my business grows and take that into account while you're selling products, then you're in an okay place. Well, all right, I think we'll do a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's move on, shall we? Ooh.
Last minute.
Final votes. Righto, let's move on. Oh, okay, so the next thing, and this is bringing a little bit more towards the content of tonight, is what state is your tech currently in? Now, for those who are, for those who are in the idea phase, your tech's probably non-existent. For those who are up in the business case or the building scaling, you're going to sit somewhere in one of these categories. Okay, someone's got some actual scaling issues. A few people are starting small.
Because it looks like we're at opposite ends of the spectrum here, either starting small or having scaling issues. There we go.
So probably should have put an option in here if I don't have tech yet.
Well, it's really,
maybe that's I don't know.
well, it's great to see that no one's lost complete control at this point.
So, all right, I think that's about the same number of respondents we had in the first one. So lovely. Okay, so what we're seeing is that we've got a whole heap of people who are trying to keep it small and contained, and that's lovely, especially in the early on. We've got a couple of people who've hit the wall and they've got some problems, and please make sure you start thinking about how we're going to ask those questions when it comes to the clinic so we can get into your personal areas and see what we can help with. Likewise with the I don't knows, if you've got any questions, start thinking about what it is that you'd like to cover off in the clinic in the second half. For those who are starting small, maybe your question is, this is where I'm at, how do I get to the point where I have scaling problems? Let's see how we go. Oh, okay, another little aspect that we'd like to, and this is the last poll I promised before we move on to some real content. I'd like to find out what everyone is selling. Not what your actual product is, but how you think about what it is you're selling, because this is a big impact on your business. Are you selling services that require people hours to deliver? Oh, I'm selling some products. I'm delivering some functionality. We've got some knowledge people. I'm selling technology. Excellent. There's our magic 14. Okay, the overwhelming number of people are selling access to knowledge. Now, I presume that's not knowledge that's driven by people hours. It's self-consumed knowledge. Please correct me later if I'm wrong or pop something in the chat. All right, so let's get into our first topic for tonight. We're going to talk about finding the right tech partners. Now, bear with me while I move some things out. So there's a couple of topics we're going to get here. We're going to talk about how to recruit. We're going to talk about how to evaluate outsourcing providers. So maybe you've decided you want to get some programming done, and rather than hire developers, you want to just outsource it. We want to talk about outsourcing specific tech services as well. Okay, so the things to keep in mind when we're talking about recruiting, particularly in the tech space in startups, but this does actually kind of apply to recruiting at all into your startup, is there are a few things that you really need to be mindful of. So the first one is about putting in the time. Unless or until you have a HR staff member on board whose responsibility is recruitment, congratulations, you've now got a new job title. You're also the HR manager. Right. Oh. Apologies, I'm the thoroughfare for the dogs who come backwards and forwards at any point in time as they feel like it. So you're the HR manager. Now, when you're trying to hire in tech staff or any staff, how you present to them and how you deal with them is going to have a huge impact on how you're able to attract talent into your business. Things you need to be mindful of is knowing what to pay. And I have a link later on where we can actually find some benchmark salaries so that you can actually offer a realistic or competitive offering to the people to attract in the sorts of people that you're going to need. Attracting the right talent as a startup, you're not going to have a big public brand. You're going to need to think about how you're going to position yourselves, especially in the tech market at the moment. Tech jobs are crazy right now. We have a huge amount of demand, a very small amount of supply, and people are shopping themselves around. I've been trying to hire recently, and it's very, very hard to find good quality candidates. You need to take your time. You need to make sure you're marketing yourselves to the tech people just as much as you're marketing yourselves to anyone else that you're actually going to hire into your business. One of the key things about a startup is that you need to hire in people who are going to be able to deal with working in a startup. Not everyone can handle working in a startup environment, and this applies to the tech people just as much applies to anyone else that you hire in. One of the things about the startup world, the pressure can be insane, and the hours are not stable, unlike many other places that you work. Please resist the temptation to do a desperation hire. A developer comes to you, says, yes, I'll work for you. You say, excellent, you're hired, without actually thinking about, are they the right people who are going to be able to deliver what my company needs, short-term as well as long-term. You need to build that level of trust with them, especially with your first tech hire. You're going to be delegating to them a lot of the technology decisions for the company. So unless you are feeling technically savvy enough to make the decisions yourselves, you're hiring someone to delegate that authority to. So whilst you might think you're hiring a developer or hiring a CTO, you might actually be hiring a bit of both. The other thing I suppose that I want to call out here as we talk about hiring slowly, your first hire may not be a CTO. And don't be tempted if you're hiring a developer to give them the title of CTO to make them feel important. If you hire a developer and you give them the title of CTO, they're going to feel all of the love. And the problem is that you've now got a CTO, so you can no longer hire a CTO as your business grows. As your business grows, as your team grows, that person either needs to grow as well and be the CTO. Otherwise, you're going to need to demote them when you actually hire in a real CTO. So please be mindful of giving out titles a little prematurely, especially when you're small. I've seen it happen so many times. We've had startups come to us and says, here's my CTO, he's also my developer and my tester and my DevOps, he's my one-man IT department. I'm like, well, he's not really a CTO then, is he? So please be wary of handing out things. The other part about hiring slowly is there are definitely alternatives to hiring in staff, again, especially while you are small. So let's talk about outsourcing providers. So if you don't want to hire in-house and you want to outsource some of your outsource to a provider, here are, I suppose, my key points of things that you need to think about when you're evaluating, is this company going to give me a good service? Now, this applies for freelancers, contractors, as well as going to a digital agency or any other company that's going to provide services to you. First and foremost, you have to understand what you are asking for. Not just, I want this built. Is this a short-term gig versus a long-term gig? Are you looking for a partner for a long-term, or you just need something done? And then that's it, that's the end of the relationship. There may or may not come something after that, but just be aware from yourself, what are you asking for? Have a look at their credentials. Can they work with startups? What do they bring to the table? Can they bring anything that will shortcut the work that needs to be done and thus make it easier? Next thing is about collaboration and dealing with change. When you're in a startup world, you're going to be sitting in a constant feedback cycle. Have a think about how are they going to deal with you moving the goalposts every other day because you've had some feedback from a customer that says, actually, I really want that on the right-hand side, not the left-hand side, move it for me. And you get all of your customers saying, move it, move it, move it. Can you then turn around to development and just say, move it? Are they going to say, yeah, no problems? Or are they going to say, that's going to be another X $1,000s worth of change management. Thank you very much. Just be aware of what you're getting in for. From that, let's talk about transparency. How are you going to be charged? Is it time and materials? Is it a fixed price? This also talks into how you're going to get billed for change. Is everything in writing? Pam's going to talk a little bit later on about legalities. Anything you do with any sort of provider, anyone who's not directly employed by your company, make sure it's in writing. I've seen startups seriously burnt because they engaged someone to build something for them and it was all lovely, and there was maybe a scope of work and an invoice and it got paid for. And at the end, the company said, no, you don't own any of the code. That's ours. We just provided you the service while it was with us. If you go somewhere else, you don't take anything with you. Which jumps all the way down to the last point. Make sure everything is in your name. Create an email address, something like techadmin at your company. Any account on any service provider that hosts anything, make sure it's your email address that owns that account. Any code that's created, make sure you own it, make sure it's all in writing, make sure you have full access and full control at all times. Don't get burnt because a service provider owns your product and they won't give it to you without a huge exit fee. I've seen that so many times. All of this leads to building up trust and understanding. One of my fundamental ways of measuring whether you can work with someone, particularly if you're a business owner who's not super tech savvy, is can they explain it to me so that I can understand? Can they speak my language or do I have to learn their language? No tech provider is worth working with if you can't understand what it is that they're trying to do for you. If they can't explain it back to you in terms that you understand, then you don't know what you're getting or what you're paying for. The choice of programming language, in a lot of cases, is absolutely irrelevant. If they can explain to you why they've chosen one over another, and that makes sense to you, and not just, I'm the authority, therefore listen to me, but they can properly explain it to you, then you're starting to build trust in a relationship. And that's something you also need to fundamentally build with anyone that you engage that's not directly employed by your company. So again, not just outsourcing providers, contractors, freelancers, casuals, anyone like that. Okay, apologies for that little interruption. Next thing, let's talk about outsourcing services. There are certain things you should never build because there are people out there who absolutely specialize in this, and that's their entire business. And therefore, the idea of rolling your own is something you should shy away from. Some of the good examples I always come across is people trying to build their own analytics packages. Google Analytics is free, just use it. There are plenty of other analytical packages out there that are equivalent or will provide analytics into your particular use case. Many providers will actually give you analytics as part of the offering. Make sure you use it. Don't try and build your own. I've seen people waste thousands of dollars trying to build analytics into their product rather than just going with something that's plug and play. Payments, credit cards. Again, until you are supersized, you can actually justify the effort. Never ever allow someone to store the credit card numbers in your platform. Always outsource credit card payments or any sort of payment methodology. Hosting, this is really kind of an obvious one. No one does hosting anymore. You outsource it. AWS, Microsoft, Google, Heroku, Telstra, you name it. There are plenty of hosting providers out there. I've got some slides later on that'll walk you through. Here's how to get free stuff from the really good ones. Authentication is another one that I just see so often where people, again, they go, oh, I've encrypted the password, but it's stored in the database. So if something happens to my system, all my users' credentials are compromised. Never build your own authentication system. Always outsource it. There are really, really good internationally renowned secure providers like Juiceroo, and there's a link later on. They'll give you a free service for your first 7,000 customers. By the time you've got 7,000 paying customers, you can probably afford to pay for their basic plan, which gets you another 20 or 50,000 customers or something like that. Again, these sorts of things, I call them the commodities. They're the sorts of things you should never build yourself. You always just buy in the service, plug and play. Don't be afraid to, I suppose, just buy something that's exactly the same as what everyone else is using. They're all using it for a reason. We all use these providers for a reason. They are the absolute best in the world, and that's why we all use them. We'll get a few more details on that on slides later on as well. Okay. Another little left field thing in here about finding tech options. Now, this technically doesn't fall under the recruitment point, but I wanted to put it in here anyway, because this is something that I always fall back to when I'm looking for a solution and I don't know where to go. There's two really good things that are published by Gartner. Gartner are a great consulting firm. They do all the hard legwork for us. They research everything. They evaluate it. They're very, very clinical. And they publish a couple of things. So the first one is what we call the Magic Quadrant. And to get onto the Gartner Magic Quadrant, you have to be pretty special. This is that, top couple of % of companies in the world get onto the Magic Quadrant. So if you're up in the top right-hand corner, you're a global leader in whatever it is the functionality that you are portraying in. So whether it's a web CMS or credit card providers or manufacturing systems or payroll, pick a functionality, there's probably a Magic Quadrant that talks about that functionality. So the big global players, they sit up in the top right-hand corner. Interestingly, what you see though, as you move back towards the middle, you find the players who are offering something a little bit different or a little bit unique or are trying to make themselves a name, but they're doing it really, really well. Particularly some of the niche players and the visionaries. You can find some really good gold in there about service providers that might just have that missing piece of the puzzle when it comes to your tech stack. Easiest way to access them is go to Google Images. Let's do a search for Gartner Magic Quadrant, Web CMS, click on Google Images and just look at all the pictures. Be aware of the hype. Anyone who gets on here hypes it. They promote it about how they're on there, therefore they're the greatest in the world. It's not always true. But anyone who appears on here is worth going and having a look at their website and seeing if they can offer a service that's going to be complementary to the product that you're building. The other variation of this is the hype cycles for those who are really interested in cutting edge tech. The Gartner hype cycles for emerging technology is always an interesting read. It really talks about the sorts of technologies that are up and coming that people are going to be talking about in a while, some of which aren't even very well known yet. If you're looking for something absolutely cutting edge to give your product a difference, something in here might give you a bit of a starting point. Okay, so key takeaways about recruiting and finding and evaluating tech. If you can't understand it, you probably don't need it. Don't buy the shiny thing because it's shiny. Don't allow an outsourcing provider to tell you what you need and just take it on face value. Make people explain it to you. If you can't understand the value it brings to your business, don't buy it. Ownership, it's all on you. Whether it's the ownership of I am the HR manager, I'm responsible for recruitment, or I need to make sure that any code written is legally owned by me, make sure your responsibility for everything. And hire slowly. Don't panic hire. Don't give out titles too quickly. Grow slowly. Outsource when you can. Use freelancers, use contractors, use agencies. Hire in when you need to. Bring consultants when you need to. Don't feel you need to fill your cup of IT resources quickly. Apologies. Oh, and that's me for the first section. Now, do we have any questions?
Okay. Thanks, Anthony. I might kick off with the next session. So I'll be talking about what is fit for purpose and why does it matter. So if we break it down, fit is the ability to perform without excessive waste or exhaustion. And an overheating laptop is not very fit in that regard. Purpose is the reason for which something exists, is done, made, or used. It is also as much in defining what it doesn't do. So while it might seem fitting to use an old computer as a doorstop, it is definitely not the purpose it was designed for. So fit for purpose is therefore to be designed to be able to perform an intended task without excessive waste or exhaustion. And so for me, fit for purpose is actually a design philosophy that helps to ensure that you build the right thing and spend your dollars wisely. Spending your dollars wisely in the IT game can be quite tricky. There is no doubt that times are more uncertain than ever, and technology options are definitely in abundance. So the following is a framework that has actually served me well, and I thought to share it with you today. It is based on the concept of set-based design, and it compares traditional thinking above with a modern approach below. Traditionally, you would embark on a single option. And after some time, it would be typical that there is some form of learning. And with some adjustment, it may be possible to react to that change. However, with multiple learnings and multiple changes being more and more common, the approach often leads to failed outcomes. Set-based design, on the other hand, has you entering with a range of options in which you distill multiple possibilities and can gain from the actual learning points over time. The approach involves down selecting options that may not have been obvious up front. In this way, you can actually take advantage of the multiple learning points and are much more likely to land in a fit for purpose solution at the end of your journey. So the model itself assumes variability in approach and involves the preservation of options, choosing not to decide too early so that you can gain from learnings and essentially end up with the most fit for purpose outcome. So we assume variability and preserve options and gain from learnings. And as a startup, it's important to appreciate the purpose underpinning your technology is likely to change dramatically over time. During the early stages, the focus is to support validation and fast feedback cycles. The more that you invest in tech prior to validation, the more likely that you will commit and gain emotional attachment, rightfully or wrongfully. So be sure not to lock yourself in too early and experiment with visual design tools and disposable low code and no code options to build working solutions that you can validate easily and throw away. And social networks are also great support for this as well. So once you start the actual build, it is important that you actually start being in control of the decisions, regardless of how technical you are. In this case, use a decision-making framework to help you navigate through some of the tougher decisions. And I'll cover a little bit more on this in a later slide. At this point, investing in automation also becomes quite important, and building a CI/CD pipeline will help you make rapid changes with minimal labor. Post the build, it actually becomes quite important to have a good pathway to scale up and down at the speed of light. And the hyperscalers such as Google, Microsoft, and AWS are great for this and will put you on a level playing field with the big guys. Don't assume, test and monitor performance and usage constantly. It is also important that you have ironed out the majority of kinks in preparation, because put simply, you just can't scale crap.
Maurice, could you explain to people who don't know what a CI/CD pipeline is?
Yes, sure. So a CI/CD pipeline is basically a mechanism whereby which you can automatically deploy your code or solution into a production environment without the expense of manual labor. And so where you actually enter into a situation where you're needing to do that frequently, automating that is actually quite a significant advantage. Another tip is to align for, another tip to align on fit for purpose is to take advantage of commodity tech where it makes sense. Did you know that both Coke and Pepsi happen to use the same Salesforce platform? And it actually doesn't matter at all. The same would be true with your competition, and used correctly, a buy versus build principle is actually an advantage. As mentioned earlier on, commodity tech is cheap, but more so than that, what it will have is your vendor actually maintaining it for you. Your unique IP, on the other hand, is far from a commodity. And this is where it makes sense to focus your investment. Build it, protect it, architect it, and engineer it well, as it will become your differentiator. So it's not technology that's the differentiator, it's how you use the technology, but actually your unique IP that truly is. Next, I'd like to share the concept of what I call an options paper. This is basically a decision-making framework that can help you navigate through just about any challenge. The framework is simple, yet very effective. And it involves you recording the problem statement. Make sure that you spend some time to actually articulate this well within the correct context. Navigate three options by appreciating the landscape. And remember that doing nothing is always an option. Assess the advantages and disadvantages of each in alignment to your immediate requirements, your budget, your strategy, and your overall fit. And allow the data to steer you towards the best fit decision. It's also a great value to keep the options paper as a record of the decision and come back to it later. Share the findings with others that you're actually engaged with so that they can also understand why you've gone down certain paths. And then finally, if you're actually engaging with a tech provider, ensure that they're also able to provide you multiple options, as if they are not able to do so, They are likely to not know how to navigate modern tech themselves. So some key takeaways. Fit for purpose helps to ensure that you build the right thing and spend your dollars wisely. Assume variability, preserve options and gain from learnings. Choose not to decide. Purpose can change and change dramatically over time, and so be conscious of this. And it often makes sense to buy versus building. Then finally, use a decision-making framework to help navigate through some of the complex decisions. I just make a call out that I cannot see if there's any questions, so if anyone can actually call them out if there are. Okay. So next I'll talk about validation and the importance that it holds. Never assume. Juiceroo was a Silicon Valley juicer startup that raised over $120 million from investors and was widely ridiculed for developing the world's best engineered juicer that people did not actually buy. The juicer retailed for about $700 and was internet connected and engineered to almost space grade standards. The product was as simple as pulling out a produce pack, securing it between the Juiceroo's squeezing plates and pressing a button to get instant cold pressed juice. Each pack had a QR code which was scanned and verified by the internet connected machine before it could be used. The claim was that it prevented packs from being used past their expiry date and to facilitate food safety recalls, although critics felt that it was a feature to form some form of digital rights management, as it would prevent operation of the press with any produce pack that was not made by the actual company. A subscription for the produce packs was also possibly a little expensive at about $2,000 per annum. So Juiceroo essentially failed due to an unattractive pricing model, an over-engineered product, customer satisfaction, and in fact, Juiceroo failed to validate against the market until it was too late and the product was already built. So you should avoid the big build. Validate continuously and build in small increments to determine whether it satisfies your customers' needs. Engage with your customers continuously and develop a backlog driving features in priority to alignment that was gained through feedback. Validate the features with your customers and ensure that you're seeking that you also validate that against any commercial models. Again, use automation and a CI/CD pipeline, as well as thorough testing of each feature. And measure adoption, as not all features have the same uptake. So in essence, the smaller the build and the more frequent releases, the better chance you have in building the right thing. It is important to think like the customer and never expect that your customers think like you. You may actually be surprised about how your customers see your product and use it. There are many approaches to gaining customer insights, each providing different perspectives, so you should not just rely on one. In my experience, surveys can help, but can also become quickly annoying. They provide quantitative and attitudinal results, and in contrast to simple observation, which is more qualitative and behavioural. Is it any surprise that people don't always do as they say? And so UX design and validation will help reduce the likelihood of building something that you don't need and your customers don't want. One of my favorite quotes is that you can't improve something that you don't measure. So be sure to enable things like web and systems and analytics. It's amazing how often this is an afterthought. Collate user feedback into groups and themes. Conduct experiments and learn from proving or disproving a hypothesis. Tune in your consumption, because with consumption-based services, over-consuming is actually overspending, while under-consuming is likely to result in poor customer experience and ultimately poor adoption. Automate what you can. You will not have time to manually see through the activity, and it can quickly become expensive. Then finally, prioritize a backlog of improvements and act on what you learn. So in summary, never assume. Avoid building the big thing. Think like the customer, measure and improve. Any questions? Otherwise.
Cool. We do have a couple of questions coming through both in the chat and through the Slido platform. I've sort of tried to answer some through there, but for everyone else, yes, we will be sharing the video. We will be sharing a copy of the slides. So don't feel you've got to screenshot every slide or make copious amounts of notes. We will be distributing those out. All the other questions, yeah, we'll try and address them between this main section and the clinic section. Okay, now. Apologies as I rearrange my screen. So I want to talk a little bit now. I suppose we're going to shift the tempo. Maurice spoke a little bit about, starting small, doing some experiments, learning, getting feedback. I'm now going to talk a little bit about what happens at the other end, what happens and how do we scale. Now, to give a little bit of context of scaling, I suppose I want to run through a couple of precursor bits of information before we start getting a bit too technical and a bit of detail. So what is scaling when it comes to business? So this is a really nice diagram from BCG Consulting. It was done a few years ago, but I found it a really nice reference point. And what it talks about is that as you grow as a business, you're effectively going to go through stepwise growth. And through that stepwise growth, your technology needs are also going to be changed. Now, as a startup, you're probably sitting off the left-hand side of the graph, and I've certainly worked in companies that have been way less than $10 million a year. I also worked in companies that have been off the right-hand side of the graph, and the concept of coping with bureaucracy is the understatement of the millennium. You can only wish that you've got that as a problem, because when you're earning that sort of billions of dollars worth of turnover, you can deal with a little bit of bureaucracy because it becomes about profitability, not survival. But if you think about some of the big players like Netflix, they didn't start off big. They took them a long time to even turn a single dollar of profit. And they went through lots and lots of different types of technology themselves. Like, they never built their own infrastructure for the first, I think it was 12 years or something like that of their existence. It took them a long time. They just bought services from someone else until they had enough critical mass that the providers couldn't actually give them what they want. And then they started building their own tech. So as a very large successful company, they threw away a very large portion of their tech stack and rebuilt it themselves. So that's something you've got to look forward to if you're becoming very successful. Cool. So what happens, let's come back to the smaller end of the scale. You're a very small startup. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4 people maybe working together. And as you start to bring in a couple more people, what happens is that you can kind of just keep it together by people talking with people. But you'll get to a point where even some of your internal business systems are going to need to grow a little bit. And your business systems, as well as your customer-facing systems, are going to go through evolution as well. Don't neglect your internal systems, but also don't feel that you need to jump too big too quickly. You know, you're not going to need an automated leave form system for quite a while. You can deal with that yourselves. You are going to need a payroll system. You're going to need to deal with the ATO. You're going to need to deal with some amount of HR, legal, and other compliance matters. But as your business grows, so too do your systems. So just be mindful to not focus all your energy on your external facing systems, but your internal ones as well. That's all I'll talk about with internal systems. Let's talk about your product and the external facing systems that you're going to build. Well, just before we get into that though, I've got to quickly back over the idea of a minimum viable product. We've all kind of heard the phrase, and I had this example come up in a slide deck yesterday, and I've shamelessly ripped it off because I think it's kind of beautiful. And the first one across the top, what we see is someone doing the big build. They build a tire, they've turned into a set of tires, they build a chassis, they build the bottom half, they build a top half, and they've launched a car because they were always going to launch a car. And it took them a very long time to build that car and get it into market and try and sell it. And all along the way, they did not have any happy customers. When we're building an MVP, the second company decided, well, we're just going to build a skateboard. We'll grab some tiny wheels and we'll hack it together and we'll get it out there and people can mess around with it. And we're going to use wheelie chairs. Wheelie chairs is one of those sort of, analogies that I use that says that not everything has to work properly, especially when you're small. People on wheelie chairs on keyboards can glue together technology behind the scenes to make it appear like it's all lovely, even when it's not. If you've got to cobble together your MVP using a bit of tech from that provider, you bought services from there, and nothing talks to each other. And so every time you have a new customer, you've got to go off and manually key them into the one system and type them over there and type them over there. Short term as part of your MVP, that's quite okay. And slowly as you release more and more versions, your skateboard can turn into a scooter, into a bike, into a motorbike. And as you're making your wheelie chair smaller and smaller and you're getting more and more sophisticated and you're getting the learnings and the feedback. All the while, by the way, you've possibly even got some paying customers before that first company's ever shipped their first car. Also be aware that even though you set out to build a car, you might get along the way and realize that what your customers actually want to buy from you is an electric bike. So you kind of stumbled upon your true product along the way. That's all I kind of wanted to say, just I suppose a bit of a reiteration of what's an MVP and why do we do it. Sometimes we set out to do something and journey along the way, we discover that that's actually not what people want to buy from us. What they want to buy is something else. And that using a bit of people glue along the way, that's pretty cool too. You don't have to go big early. In fact, I kind of recommend you avoid it. Okay, so let's talk about building a roadmap for your tech. And how that aligns to your business. So the tech roadmap anticipates your business roadmap. Sorry, I've been hosting too many meetings today. I think I'm starting to lose my voice. So yeah, your tech roadmap anticipates your business roadmap, but don't build features until you need it. As you're going along the journey, your customers are going to tell you what features they want. And until you have a reason to build a feature, you probably don't need to build it yet. Just-in-time development works just as well as just-in-time manufacturing. The great news about tech is you get to decide right last second what it is you're actually going to build. The other thing I want you to keep in mind is to select the technology to deliver your features, not the other way around. You might be using a piece of technology for one feature and discover it does 3 other things. That doesn't mean those 3 other things are right for your product. Make sure that your features are actually driven by business value, not because they're doable by tech. So what I normally do, and this is something we do quite often with startups, is we get basically 2 versions of this. We say, right, from a business point, what's your short, medium, and long-term business goals? And then how do we align the technology to that short, medium, and long term? So short term, we want to build an MVP, a minimum viable product. I always put the question mark next to viable because it doesn't necessarily need to be viable, short term or long term. One of the points of an MVP is you can get it out there, you can get some learnings from it, and quite often you'll actually throw it away. Disposable technology is your friends. The concepts of using low-code platforms or SaaS style platforms to get some learnings very quickly, that's absolutely a great place to start. We've had some, startups that we've advised, and they've been through, I think, 3 or 4 versions of the MVP using slightly different providers, trying to find the balance of what it is their product actually needs to offer to their customer. And every time they hit the limits of a tech, they just throw it away and start it away on the next provider that offers what that one did with a little bit more, and they're growing and learning and growing and learning. So as you go from your MVP towards your, what we call the MMP, the minimum marketable product, think of this as your version 1 real product. Some of what you built in your MVP can come forward. Don't be afraid to throw a bunch of stuff in the bin. Keep the learnings, keep the value, throw away the technology. Build your MVP, invest as little as you can for the most amount of functionality as quickly as you can to validate your product in the market, get the learnings so you can then build the next version, which will be even better. One of the cool things about technology is you do not need to become emotionally attached to it. It is not a family member. It is not a pet. Please don't treat it as such. Question how much this technology needs to exist going forward in your business, and really bring forward just the things you need. Obviously, once you've got your version 1, you're thinking about how you're going to scale. Scaling comes in 2 forms. We talk about scaling as far as volume of customers. How do we serve that many people? How do we host and store that much data? How do we have that many concurrent connections? The other thing that also scales is your feature set. More and more customers usually means more and more features. They're demanding more and more. How do you then manage the complexity of your application? So one of the things we also then talk to is come back to the concept that Maurice was talking about with SetBased Design. Defer any technical decision that doesn't need to be made now. If I know that in a couple of years' time, I'm going to need to introduce artificial intelligence and machine learning, do I need to pick the tech stack to implement that on? No, it's years away. It's like an eon in the startup world. Deal with what's in front of you. Think about long term, and in the next couple of slides, we're going to give you some examples of what to think about, but build for now. Technology is disposable. Don't get emotionally attached. Okay, so let's talk about large-scale architecture in the cloud. There's a few areas that we like to, I suppose, call out from a best practices guide as to how we do cloud architecture for large-scale applications. Definition of large scale, that's kind of open for interpretation. You'll kind of know when you're hitting the wall with your current design that it's time to make some architectural changes as to how your application is put together. You do not need to do all of this at once. You can slowly evolve over time. You might be in a version 1, version 2, version 3. At some point, there's going to be a bottleneck somewhere in your application, or you're going to realize that you need disaster recovery or fault tolerance, or this can't store enough data, I need more storage capacity, or whatever it is. Or maybe literally your bill is starting to skyrocket and it's the actual billing that's getting out of control. So we need to think about how do we actually swap out parts of our application for more cost-effective ones. And this is where we start to do cloud architecture at scale. So the sorts of things that we cover off when we do cloud architecture is that we need to design for failure. So again, as your business is getting successful, as you're getting more and more customers, you're setting an expectation around the quality of the service that you're providing. Maybe it's demanded on day one. Maybe that your particular customers are with the government or the military, and they have some very exacting standards, even from an MVP. Maybe you're just going to general mums and dads who maybe don't have quite the quality needs. But at a certain point, if they're going to store information in your platform, or if they're going to pay a monthly fee, they're going to expect that it's there when they want it. So having it shut down, fall over, database dies and you lose all the data, that's not going to be acceptable. And so what we have is a principle called design for failure. And when you start using the bigger tier providers, what that usually means is that your data is hosted in multiple physically isolated data centers simultaneously. I was on a call with AWS day before yesterday, and they were talking about how they set up their zoning. And they were explaining that they have a minimum distance between the data centers, even inside a city like Melbourne, to make sure that they're on different power grids. So if the power goes out and they lose power in a data center, even momentarily before the generators kick in, the other data center on the other side of town is on a different power grid so that it always stays on. And they can seamlessly transition your routing inside, I think it was half a millisecond or something like that, to make sure that you are always up and that your customers don't even know that there's been some sort of failure. Redundancy can be built into all layers. If you think about the basic layers of a web application, we talk about front end, back end, and the data layer. The back end, where all of your business logic sits. What happens if that code crashes? We make sure that we have our code, we have multiple copies of our code running at all points in time, so that if something happens, one copy is running while the other copy is rebooting and it comes back up again. Gone are the days where we just buy a virtual computer and install everything off it, and that one computer serves our entire world. We break it up and make sure that we've got redundancy, and we design for failure at all different layers. We, of course, absolutely have to build security into every single layer. It's all nice that we put a little bit of JavaScript in the browser and we check that someone types an email address in the form before they hit submit, but hackers are going to get around that in about 0.5 of a second. Are we protecting the back end? Are we protecting the database and all the data and the storage and all of that data and knowledge that's under the hood? We make sure that we put security in at all the layers. Again, going with some of the big tier one providers, they're going to build you basically firewalls around your world to make sure that hackers, denial of service attacks, and all those nasty people just can't get into the network and infrastructure. The next thing we look about is leveraging different functional options. Part of this is about saying that one piece of technology doesn't need to serve all of your application's needs. We talk about it a little bit further down when we talk about loose coupling. But different functional options talks about, again, don't have one virtual server building your entire application. Don't roll it yourself. Buy the functionality from the providers at the most abstracted level. So don't buy a server, install a database on it. Buy the database service where all of that back-end infrastructure and patching and all the different bits and pieces, that's all just taken care of for you. That's part of what you pay for. All you do is consume the service. We talk about elasticity and thinking in parallel. This is where things like containerization and automatic scaling come into play. Containerization, for those who are not familiar, is a way that you can package a whole bunch of code, logic, functionality into a single package, and you can run that package anywhere. You can run on AWS, Google, Microsoft, Heroku, Telstra, Web Central, you name it. Anyone who can run a container can run that container. It's the international standard of portability for your application. If you can build your applications running the container, you can pick it up and drop it anywhere at any point in time, and it will work flawlessly. That's one of the things that we love about containerization, is it avoids vendor lock-in. I'll talk a little bit more. I've got a couple of slides about pricing and how to compare value of different providers. Containerization is something that will allow you to chop and change providers as your business grows without having to throw away the tech stack once you've made that big investment and you're starting to scale. The other thing about elasticity in parallel is that your traffic is not always the same. Do you have the same number of users at midday as midnight? Do you have the same users at 4 p.m. as you do at 4 a.m.? Probably not. Some of you might, but that's a bit of a rare exception. So wouldn't it be lovely if you could increase your capacity during the day, which you pay for, and then decrease it when your users are not as many and get the savings? That's where elasticity in parallel comes into play. And again, containers help you out in that. Containers is not the be all and end all. There's lots of other great ways of doing this. We talk about serverless technology. We talk about auto scaling groups. But it all fits under the concept of elasticity and parallel. Loose coupling is again something that you're going to do more and more of as you scale. And what loose coupling means is that you break your big application down into lots of little components that talk to each other. And the way they talk to each other is through basically whatever you define as a standard. And the cool thing about that is that each of those components can be swapped out with any other technology as long as they talk on that same interface. They can be hosted anywhere. They can be swapped and changed, and they can also be scaled. If you find that you've got a web application and you've built a video streaming option in there, so someone can log in and they can watch some videos. Where are your videos hosted? Well, when you're small, they might just be hosted on a disk. When you've got more and more users, that disk is not going to keep up with that many users. So you need to swap that disk out with something that's faster, or a proper streaming service, or another external provider. And being able to swap out just a component of your application to get the performance where you need it without having to throw everything away, that's part of the architecture that you want to get towards, and that's what we call loose coupling or decoupled applications. You might also have heard it called headless or serverless. Basically, the idea is that you break it down into little components. They all talk to each other, and each individual component can be managed, it can be scaled, it can be cost optimized, it can be performance optimized, and it can be turned on and off when you need it. And again, when you're big and you're scaling, those sorts of adjustments to your tech stack and your application become really, really important, both from a cost management point, but also from a customer satisfaction point. So, and of course, the other thing is do not fear constraints. One of the good things about going to the big cloud providers is that they're bigger than you'll ever be until you get to the point where you dwarf them. Now, we're talking about dwarfing players like AWS and Microsoft, so what a lovely position to be in. For the rest of us mere mortals, even if we're super mega successful, they're going to be able to scale us to whatever we need in whatever capacity that we want. Again, one of the values of going to a larger provider is that you do not have any constraints about how you scale, and you can also chop and change as you will again. So those are probably the best, I suppose, cloud architecture best practice that I can give you without getting into actual specifics. And I'm very happy to talk to any of these later on in the clinic about your individual tech stacks or applications or businesses in whatever direction that you want to get some advice on. Okay, a bit of a reference point. Apologies to all the people whose eyes are glazing over because the idea of this sort of scale is a little bit overwhelming at the moment. I'll talk about the big three providers. This is, of course, not limited to these providers, but they're kind of the shining lights when it comes to what we call the hyperscalers and the tier one providers. So your AWS, your GCP, and your Microsoft, they all publish what we call reference architectures. So if you want to know how to build some functionality in your application, these guys all publish what they consider a best practice about how to do it in their world. So I did a quick searching up and I just kind of picked out a random example. And I said, I want to know how to do video on demand as part of my application. Now, where the video comes from, I've kind of left out of the equation. That could actually be what your application is. Maybe people can upload video and then they can watch it back. Maybe you're buying in video from somewhere else. Doesn't really matter. You've got some video. You want to be able to serve it down to your customers on demand. What we've got on here on the left is how Microsoft say, this is how you use our services to do video on demand in the most optimized way to give the best user experience for the most cost optimized, but being able to scale up and down as needs. And pretty much everything in this diagram is pay for consumption. So if you don't use it, you don't pay. If you use it lots, you pay lots. It's all a relative sizing scale. The one on the right is the AWS version, and they say, well, here's our products, and this is how you would achieve essentially the exact same thing using the AWS stack. And in a similar way, most of these things are pay as you go, pay for your use. There's a couple of things in there that have a base monthly plan, but the base monthly plan includes a heap of usage as well, so it ebbs and it flows. You can also see they're very, very different. That's okay. They achieve the same thing. Most of this is about how they break down their internal componentry. And the other thing I'll sort of say is that if this all looks like complete gobbledygook, that's okay. You're not just at that point yet. When you get to the point where you need to look at reference architectures from the big players, you will have the tech people around you to help explain all of this to you. I'll talk a little bit about some of the actual tech services provided by these players later on as well. Oh, okay, I think we've glazed people over a little bit. So, key takeaways from this section. Build for now, think for the future. Don't get emotionally attached to your technology, especially in the early days. Think about how much of your technology you can throw away as you move from phase to phase. Think about what does the future look like, but realize you don't need to build that yet. Design the architecture for your journey. There's not a one size fits all. I can't say if everyone just built their application on that tech stack and that provider, you'll be successful. That doesn't exist. You are going to have to tailor it for your own journey. And again, don't be afraid to throw something away. Whether you've outgrown it, it just doesn't make sense, it doesn't do what you need it to do, or any other reason, again, don't become emotionally attached to technology.
I forgot to unmute myself.
Oh, over to Pam. So do you want me to keep on the screen share, Pam?
Yes, please. So
just call out when you want me to click the next slide.
Yep, I definitely will. Thanks for that. So I'm covering off dealing with security, compliance and legal needs. And one of the reasons that I've got that task is because at one point in my life, I was a lawyer and an IP lawyer at that. And I spent a lot of time working in technology law as well. So we'll head to the first slide. Thanks, Anthony. One of the first and major things that you need to be concerned about from a legal perspective, if you are offering a product to the world via the net and you are collecting information from customers, is the risks to those customers' personal information to their privacy. So I might add here that the way that we're going to approach the legal section is to look at the risks, look at what the worst case outcomes are if the risks are realised, and then have a look at the ways that the risks can be addressed so you don't end up experiencing the worst case outcomes. Getting back into privacy, the main risks here are storing substantial amounts of personal information without notice or the permission of the owners, without giving notice to the owners or getting their permission to use that information. Storing personal information without appropriate security. Storing personal information in dodgy overseas locations like Afghanistan and Pakistan and other sorts of places that might not have very good privacy compliance regulations in place. Allowing third parties to access personal information that you're storing without oversight. So you might be dealing with third-party service providers, for instance, who are providing you with some ancillary software products, and those software products or the support services that are provided through those software products might end up accessing the personal information of your customers or subscribers in some way. That is a major risk to you. You need to understand who's having access to that information. If, in the unfortunate instance that personal information is breached because those sorts of risks are not attended to, that can result in $1 million fines for breaching privacy legislation if it is applicable in your circumstances, and I'll go back to that in a few minutes. It can result in major reputational damage to your company when user information is stolen by third parties who then subsequently steal people's identities and embarrass them publicly. And then, of course, your users can sue you for all the losses that they've suffered. Now, the Australian privacy legislation, which is called the Privacy Act 1988, and the Australian privacy principles which apply in Australia, don't generally apply to small to medium companies, especially startups, unless you are earning over $300,000 a year, or you fall into an identified category such as you're trading in personal information, or you are providing health services. But I would definitely argue that you need to be concerned about that outcome, because regardless of whether the legislation applies, it's advisable to have some reasonable privacy standards in place, because poor privacy protection is a deal breaker for users these days, and they can still sue you for any damage that they suffer due to a data breach. And even if you aren't caught by Australian legislation, globally the world is moving to implement, many regions of the world are moving to implement a patchwork of different privacy regulations that might apply to your business in various regions. So if you're not caught by the Australian legislation, you will ultimately probably be caught by Californian or European legislation. Let's have a look at how to address these worst case scenarios. And that's by very good privacy risk management. Implementing a high level of privacy or security protection for all stored personal information. PI stands for personal information, by the way, especially any health and financial information, because that's the most sensitive data. And if that's breached, it can cause untold damage to the owners of that data. Ensure that users know that personal information that you're collecting from them is being stored and used in particular ways. Tell them who has access to it and where it's located. You can do that via your company privacy policy, which you can publish on your website. That's the usual way of advising users about how you're dealing with their data. Another way to approach that particular requirement is to have a data collection notice, for instance, on your website when you're asking people for particular information or asking them to sign off on something. or click through to a contract or to obtain a service or product. Another important thing you should bear in mind is, and I've mentioned storing information in dodgy locations. Don't store personal information in dodgy locations that don't comply with privacy regulations. Monitor and maintain a list of all third parties, including service providers and staff who are accessing personal information that you hold, and limit access in your company policies on a needs-to-know basis. Also, I think a very important point, don't hold on to personal information if you don't need it. Once you're finished with it, delete it, because it's an ever-increasing risk holding vast amounts of personal information these days. And the other thing you need to bear in mind is that you shouldn't use it for purposes that you haven't notified the users about in your privacy policy. So if you're collecting information for one purpose and you've told people about that in your privacy policy, don't then turn around and use it for another purpose without notifying them, because that is definitely something which is covered by privacy legislation if you're caught by it. But it's also something that can aggravate your users if they subsequently find that out in some way. We'll now move on to security.
Sorry, Pam, just before we go, and we do have a question from the audience on this. Can you give an example of a small or a startup company that has been negatively impacted by a breach like this? Can you think of an example that's been, I suppose, more in the public press? I'm sure you've got lots of examples that you can't really talk about because of lawyer privilege, etc. But can you think of anything that's maybe a bit more public?
Well, the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner publishes a vast list of transgressors every quarter, and I can't claim to have knowledge of all of those, but I do know of a number of instances where perhaps small healthcare businesses that have collected quite a large amount of information have suffered a security breach, and people have subsequently had their identities stolen and have been shamed publicly when information about their disabilities have been released. And that company was censured, I believe, by the OAC, the Australian Information Commissioner, but subsequently I think they were sued, and that's the main point here. It's one thing to be censured or penalised by OAC. They may not fine you if you're a small business, but it's another thing to suffer the reputational damage of having your subscribers and users and customers suing you. And that's where I think this business actually went wrong, and they subsequently went out of business as a result.
Cool, thank you. Maybe from a different angle, I can share I know a couple of startup young companies who built a product, and they were trying to pitch. I know one was trying to pitch into a university, and the other one was trying to pitch into a government department. And of course, they have some pretty well thought out, questionnaires and scrutinizing process. And when they started to do a bit of a, where would my employees' data be stored and who would have access to it and how do you guarantee security on that, it quickly unraveled that it wasn't well secured. They didn't really even know where the data was actually stored because they didn't even understand who their hosting provider was and where the underlying infrastructure was. And in those two, they were essentially just immediately dropped off the list and says, well, no, I'm going to talk to you. Yeah. Come back when you're more mature and you understand how to handle data and how to handle security. And I know those two particular examples, I'm sort of, I wasn't directly involved, but I've spoken to the people who were. They kind of, or not quite bet their entire company on getting those gigs, but they were absolutely banking on the need of that for their companies to stay alive. And they went through a very, very rocky time afterwards because they didn't understand how to set themselves up with the knowledge and the structure to get into a winning position, particularly with those more high-profile potential customers.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Global companies require a fairly high standard of privacy and security engagement from the get-go. So it doesn't matter that you're an SME. they're going to expect those standards of you, for sure.
Yeah. Absolutely. Look, having previously worked for large international corporates, I worked for one that was based out of the EU, and they said anything you, I suppose, buy as a service, software, whatever, has to conform to EU privacy standards. I don't care that your people are in Australia, it has to conform to EU privacy laws.
Absolutely. Well, EU privacy laws is, as you know, is the GDPR.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going to go into explaining what that acronym stands for.
That's not. We've only got an hour and a half left.
But suffice to say that it requires compliance to a much higher standard than what we need to do in Australia. So small companies who are offering products into the European Union are required to maintain an office with a privacy officer in residence in order to deal with that legislation.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you. All right, let's keep the show moving on.
Okay, well, moving right along to security, the risks here. Okay, if you don't have adequate security in place, which is a common problem for businesses starting out, and especially when you're at the MVP stage, it is something that you need to bear in mind that failing to protect data adequately from malicious attack is a serious problem. Also, something that startups come across quite frequently is misaligning their IT and security strategy. So focusing too much on the IT strategy and what they're going to build and what's going to meet their customers' needs without thinking about how to secure and look after their customer data at the same time. Using wrong security products or products that don't really meet their security needs or aren't really appropriate to the type of products that they're offering, the types of data that they're holding. Failure to monitor third-party vendors accessing data, that problem we called out in regards to privacy, it equally applies to security. Mismanaging software patches and updates. I mean, when you buy certain forms of software, they frequently bring out, the manufacturers can frequently bring out patches or updates, and it's quite easy to kind of forget to update the software. And if you don't do that, that could lead to some serious consequences. Another problem that startups often encounter is failing to review any new code that they write or their service providers write for them for security vulnerabilities. So not really paying attention to the security aspect there. If you don't really attend to these types of risks, the worst case outcomes are that your IT systems are hacked and sensitive data, personal information, and your IP are stolen, and your systems may become inoperable. Third parties can sue for collateral damage suffered by them, namely subscribers, users, and IP owners if their information is stolen. And your business activities are compromised or frozen or destroyed completely. Again, just as with our discussion about privacy, there is a reputational risk here with security breach generally, I think, even if it doesn't involve personal information. I just maybe might ask Maurice and Anthony, there's quite a number of different types of security breaches these days. What's the most popular one on the market at the moment?
Yeah, look, the most recent one, Pam and audience, was the Log4j, I suppose, incident that basically hit the majority of web applications out on the internet. In summary, what it was is a third-party library that most applications use behind the scenes to allow for transactions to be logged, and basically a vulnerability was actually exploited out of that particular utility. The utility being used in wide-scale application basically opened up a backdoor to very large systems. And that required a real, I suppose, balance of reacting to the problem very quickly, as well as mitigation and controls that needed to be implemented in order to stop that widespread vulnerability. And so that's probably one of the most frequent ones. Most recent.
Thanks for that. I think we move on to how these risks can be addressed. Thanks, Anthony. The main point, and this also applies equally to privacy, protect your data from the start, and designing your IT systems with security and privacy in mind. Check any new code for vulnerabilities, control and monitor third-party access to your IT systems. Don't store data in dodgy locations. I know I keep on rattling on about that, but it is a common problem because those dodgy locations are really damn cheap. So it's an attractive but dangerous option. Assess any data security needs that you have and implement suitable products. If you're dealing with high-risk data, then you need high-risk protection. And that might cost a little bit more money, but it's worth it in the long term to protect your reputation and your customers. If in doubt, pay or ask an IT security expert and ensure everything is backed up. It's amazing to say this in this day and age, but quite frequently I come across people who have got mission critical information on their laptop and it's not backed up somewhere else. So subsequently, if that laptop is hacked or becomes inoperable for some reason due to a virus, they will have lost all of their mission critical information. So it's important to have your information up on a server somewhere, or some located in a hard drive somewhere else. At least if something happens to your laptop or wherever you've got information located, you've got somewhere that you can sort of go to get access to it again. Remember to also protect your mobile devices. So if you're using two-factor authentication for your laptops, make sure that you roll that out to your employees' mobile devices as well, because mobile devices that access your IT systems can also be a conduit for malevolent activity. And also make sure that you keep up to date with software versions and patches. We'll move on to the sort of more standard legal risks. And when I sort of was compiling this information, I was really thinking about the sort of general risks that apply to IP and, dealing with other people and talking to people about your ideas and collaborating with others. So the risks here are that you develop your IP or products with collaborators without relevant IP protections in place. You use code or IP owned by third parties without their permission, or God knows how you found it, but somebody gave you some nice code and you've decided to include it. Using open source code that, unbeknown to you, might have rather restrictive conditions on its use, and contracting without a written agreement that protects your rights. Now, Anthony has called that the dangers of that out. You wouldn't think, again, that this would be a common issue, but in fact, it actually is, especially when people are dealing with their friends. The worst case outcomes that would result from failure to attend to these types of risks are that your IP is actually stolen by another party, or third-party license owners, owners of software, demand back paid compensation for using their software without their agreement. Open source code stops product development. And because you have an oral agreement in place and you subsequently disagree with the other side, you end up having a major legal battle and misunderstanding as a result. how we manage those risks, we'll have a look at on the next slide. Well, firstly and foremostly, only talk about your product ideas with other people after you've had them sign an NDA. If you're going to get down and dirty and really go into the details, you really need an NDA in place, because there's no real copyright in ideas. So if you haven't committed your product to writing, it's in dire danger of being ripped off. At least if you have a non-disclosure agreement in place, that'll protect you to some extent. I would then encourage you also to commit your product ideas to writing, because copyright immediately subsists in the written copy that relates to the product idea. Ensure that every agreement that you have to work with someone, to collaborate with someone, is in writing, and preferably seek legal advice. Don't just download a standard form contract from the internet and seek to try and amend it yourself to suit your circumstances, because frequently that leads to grief. There's some tricks about dealing with lawyers in this space. I know amongst startups that you're often cash strapped, and lawyers are expensive. But there are many lawyers and legal firms out there now, and you can have a look at Startup Victoria as a reference point, who provide cut price services to startups. And for instance, Luna Studio is one of those, and they are a preferred provider to Startup Victoria members. And then I think another tactic that you can use with lawyers is to ask for a flat fee quotation, and don't go with the hourly rate, because feel free. People don't realise this, but most lawyers will negotiate with other lawyers when we want legal work done, and we'll haggle with them for a flat fee for a contract. So, you know, as a rule of thumb, you know, at a startup level, you wouldn't want to be paying any more than maybe $1,500 for a standard form rights contract of 5 or 6 pages. That's to give you a bit of a ballpark to start with. And certainly 2,000, I think, is 2,000 too much. So protect your IP with the relevant ownership framework. And if it's, no matter what that is, if it's a patent, then start going down the road to investigating a patent and engage with a patent attorney. If it's a trademark, go on to IP Australia and apply for a trademark. If you can't protect your IP in any other way, then, and it involves some secret source, for instance, like Coca-Cola or Kentucky Fried Chicken, then have a confidentiality, a really rock solid confidentiality agreement in place. And for code, make sure that you place your code in a repository. Now, the boys can correct me here. Is BitLocker a good place to put code?
This is why we don't let Pam near the tech slides. No, BitLocker is something else. Git is the word you're looking for. I cover it in about 3 slides time.
Oh, good, excellent. Sorry about that. What is BitLocker, by the way?
That's Windows hard drive encryption.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, so basically encrypts your hard drive to your laptop. So if someone pulls the hard drive out and puts it in something else, they can't read your data. It's a very good product.
Easy safety mechanism for a Windows laptop, just in case you leave it on a train.
Okay, so forgive me for that particular sin. We'll get on to the final point here, which is make sure that you license required software. Don't borrow it, and check the conditions associated with using any open source code. Now, this is a very important point, because some open source code frustrates commercialization. And what I mean by this is that some licenses require you to make whatever product that you create, if it's a tech product, they require you to make that available to the public for free. So you would be it would be very concerning to use that type of code in building up your tech product, because you know you basically couldn't sell it if that was the case. So that's why it's quite important to check open source code licenses. And there's quite a lot of information on Wikipedia regarding all the different types of licenses that are around. But again, when in doubt, engage an expert on that. So that concludes my little presentation. No, it doesn't. We've got the key takeaways. We've got the key takeaways. Okay. Obviously, protect your IP. Store data and personal information safely. Know who is accessing your data, no matter where they are. Implement good security and put all your agreements in writing. Oh, and I might add one extra bit of information here, and I think Anthony called it out. If you're dealing with service providers and you're getting them to develop your product for you and create mission critical IP for you, which is going to be something that's going to distinguish your product, make sure in your service contract with them that you are in that IP. Thanks, Sam.
I might just highlight that there are a couple of questions in the chat. First one from Sayed. Does hosting data on AWS or Microsoft mean I am safe with data and security and hacking in that front?
I think that you are, but I'll also call on you two to. You're shaking your heads.
No. Put simply, you're not. What actually does happen is the actual servers that Microsoft or AWS actually run have a level of protection that they actually provide. But whenever you write a line of code, the code that you actually develop that sits on top of that actually provides a level of vulnerability. And so it's very important to actually ensure that you mitigate the vulnerabilities over the top of code that you actually develop.
Yeah, so it's look in a similar way to the next question as well about backing up data. It's partly yes and partly no. Just really focusing on AWS and Microsoft, they both have what they call shared responsibility model. And what that means is that all the really low level stuff, the physical servers, the data centers, access to any of that low level infrastructure or even operating systems, they manage all of that and that's their responsibility. And they make sure that someone can't just walk into the data center and rip the hard drive out and walk off with someone's data and IP. Okay. I remember watching an AWS and they talk about with their data centers, they always make their driveways do like a figure of S, so that no one can actually get up speed and ram through the front gate. So that's how much level they go to with, physical protection on their data centers. And that's just one of the many, many things they do. Anything that you put into their world, you're responsible for. So as Maurice said, if you write a line of code and that allows a hole into your data, that's on you. If you create a user in the database and give it a blank password and give it full administrator rights, guess what's going to happen? Someone's going to find it and get all of your data, and that's you. Yes, you can configure stuff wrong. One of the things that I'll talk about in 4 or 5 slides time is how to put checks and balances in place and how to get access to some of those resources to make sure that you are doing it right, and how to get reviews. And how to, I suppose, put in the balances to make sure you're doing it. AWS and Microsoft in particular, they do publish a lot of best practices guides. They publish tools to help you check stuff. They even provide services where they can get people to review what you're doing, especially as a startup. You are eligible for a bunch of stuff as a startup that you would otherwise have to pay for, or to come to someone like uSpark or Unico or CGI or someone like that and spend a lot of money on to get your things reviewed. As far as backing up, again, they guarantee all the low-level infrastructure. They build the redundancy in. You can also build redundancy into your application. All the services all include a backup option. How often would you like it backed up and where? If you need to go back in time, let's say that you deployed some code today and it overwrote a chunk of data in your database. Did you have a backup last night that you can restore from to step backwards in time with your data, or is that data now gone? That backup configuration is onto you. They will guarantee that the backups will run when they need to run, and that the data stored by those backups exists. And they provide mechanisms to store those backups in areas which have a very, very high level of assurance that they will exist and they will not die themselves, so that your backups are protected. So you don't always have to back up AWS data to somewhere else. They actually provide their own mechanisms, and they're talking about 9 nines of availability. So 99.9999999% availability. So the probability of you losing, I think it's if you put 1 million files on and then you wait 10,000 years, you will lose 1 file. I can't remember the exact numbers, but it's kind of on that scale. That's what they guarantee their lowest level disk storage to be, from a guarantee that they won't lose your data through a fault of their infrastructure.
I might just add to that, one of the things to consider is how long you can actually tolerate an outage. So your time to recovery. And that's often going to be a bit of a business view that you'll actually have in terms of the ability to sustain an outage. And it's important to actually devise a backup regime that will actually align to the business needs. And if you have a need to actually recover within a day, that you actually have that design within your solution.
Mm-hmm.
The default would actually not necessarily align with general business practices. So just think about the maximum tolerable outage that you can actually face, and the maximum recovery time that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Sure. The next question, I think that falls on from this, and I think we might go for a break in a minute. We're a bit over halfway through. I'll quickly answer this, then I think we'll come for a break, and then we'll back over all the questions before we get into the clinic section. How does data sharing work, e.g. Salesforce managing a platform which is accessed by several operators? So I think, presume you mean operators, you mean like different customers, basically all have all their data sort of together on the Salesforce platform. How do they manage it all, keep it separate, secure it, etc.? That's what we call multi-tenant design. So it is designed from the top of their application to the bottom, all the way up and down, about how they keep that data separate and how they run all their access controls and security through all the layers of their software and platform. To be honest, without going into detail, which I could spend about 6 or 8 hours on just in itself about multi-tenancy design, that's the key word. If you're interested, Google up multi-tenancy design. It'll give you some good pointers as to what's going on in that space. If you're thinking about building a SaaS style application where you're providing functionality out to multiple, corporate customers, multi-tenancy design is something you're going to have to think about. At the lowest level, you can think about, okay, each person that has a login has access to their data and only their data, and you need to make sure that that lives at the data level, the application level, and the front end level as well, and it's secured top to bottom. And that there is no way that a person that's logged in can somehow see someone else's data when they shouldn't.
That's probably the important point to close that out in terms of Salesforce or a provider such as Salesforce. Their responsibility actually relies upon that particular provider to actually ensure that it is virtually impossible to be able to actually get data from somebody else's use of the same platform.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. All right, so it's 9 minutes to 8, so let's take a shortened 10-minute break. Everyone grab a water, grab a beverage. After the break, I think we've got one more topic to cover off, which is getting access to free stuff. We all love a freebie. We all love a discount. We'll then cover off the last few questions from both the chat channels, and then hopefully I want to dedicate a good chunk of time to start talking about, I think there's a few people responding right at the front. Mm-hmm. They've hit the wall and they're having problems scaling. And there's also a couple of people that had a bit of an I don't know moment. So we'd love to hear from all of you. So start thinking about what's the question that you'd like to bring up. And we'll turn the screen share off and we'll just talk about your business and your tech, and we'll try and get into a bit of detail. So everyone take a quick break and we'll see you back here just coming on 8 o'clock.
Go back. Oh, my video.
I'm on the J's now.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. Can we get a hand wave or something so I know that people are back? I have no idea how to do gestures in Zoom. I got a thumbs up from someone. Yes. Oh, okay. There we are. We got a bunch of things coming up. Excellent. Lovely. Great to see everyone back. Thank you for returning. We've had a few people disappear. See, the list has gotten slightly shorter. No problems. They'll miss out on some of the freebies, or they'll have to watch later. Okay, so let's get through this next section pretty quickly because I want to get in some actual conversational stuff. So a lot of this stuff is the sorts of things for you to take home and have a look at later. I suppose I just want to point out this is what it means so that later on when you're looking at it, it makes sense. A few of the online resources that we spoke about earlier on. So here's a link to a startup salary guide. It's by a company called Think and Grow. They basically published a salary guide. There's plenty around if you want, I suppose, Google them up. The interesting one I like about this is it's specifically for people operating in earlier stage startups, which is a very different from a salary guide for, say, an enterprise or different size businesses. So that's an interesting one to use as a bit of a point of reference. Just use it for a reference. It's not the gospel, but it's a good thing to sort of say, all right, if I want to hire someone, where do I even start? How do I know if they're asking a reasonable amount? How do I know if I'm being taken for a ride? How do I know if I'm being a cheapo? Licensing. Pam spoke before about licensing of software. Free isn't always free. Just because something's open source doesn't mean that it's not going to have an impact on your business. There's a couple of sites here which I think give you a really good resource for going and understanding what it is you're getting yourself into when it comes to using open source licensing. Good old toolongdon'treadlegal.com. You can do a reverse search where you can say, show me licenses that are going to be compatible with commercial software. So if you want to sell the product you're making, the license needs to be compatible with commercial software. Pam said some licenses, if you use their code in your product, you're required to give your product away for free. Other licenses says you need to give away all the source code, which includes all of your IP, to the public for free. Be wary, you may get caught. On snike.io, there's a really nice review that just kind of explains this is what open source licensing is and how to navigate the quagmire. None of this is a substitute for real legal advice, but we also understand that small businesses, sometimes you just got to do a reading bit yourself. And again, it's one of those things that if you're outsourcing or you've got developers in your team, make sure that they're aware if they're using software that there is a license attached to it and they understand what that license is and what it means. Gartner Magic Quadrants. Here's the official site for Magic Quadrants. I just use Google Images. Again, be aware of the hype. Website security, there's a really cool site called badssl.com where they'll actually give you some really cool examples of what's good security and what's bad security and how to detect it in your browser. Something to play with later. Okay, I want to quickly talk a little bit about free services that you can get from some providers because some are really cool and they're great, but free often leads to expensive. And I've just pulled out a small example here that I want to run through to kind of give you an idea about how free can lead to expensive. So what we've got here is the cost per month for basically a virtual computer to run some software on. So what we can see is that this first provider has a free tier and it's $0 a month, and you get a little small one and it says it's great for making a sandbox or playing around. And that's awesome because it means you're not spending any money until you're ready to put something in front of a customer. When you read the fine print, what it says that if no one's using your application for 30 minutes, we're going to shut it down. And when someone wants to access it, it's going to take 2 to 5 minutes to boot back up before they can access the service here. And you go, ooh, that's not very good for doing some testing with my customers. If they go to hit my website and it takes 2 to 5 minutes to load, they're just going to think that my company doesn't exist anymore and that's it, I've lost them. So I've got to jump up to one of the plans. You can say, okay, well, perfect for small scale personal projects. No. Production applications, excellent. All right, so I'm somewhere in the $25 to $50 a month. Hang on, how do I get from $0 to $50 a month? Let's do a quick comparison. $50 a month buys you a server with 1 gig of RAM. If I look at sorry, I just realized my mouse is on the wrong screen. If I go down to a different provider, 1 gig of RAM on a server costs me $5 a month. That's 10 times the price from the provider that started out free compared to if I went with this other provider. Now, the second provider doesn't have a free option, so you pay from day zero. But be aware that free stuff can often get very expensive very quickly. That's how they get you in. And we spoke earlier on about disposable technology, portability, and not getting emotionally attached to your tech stack. If you build something in a container, you can host it on the free thing while you're building it, and that's lovely. When you need to put it in front of customers, you can just pick it up and put it on the paid one. And instead of paying $50 a month, you pay $5 a month. And that's much nicer on the hip pocket, as well as nicer experience for your customers. So if you can get away with the free one, it's awesome. Now, the one at the top, if you're wondering who these players actually are, the company at the top is Heroku. They're a lovely company. I built lots of stuff with them. I got a heap of stuff on their free platform. It's great because it's free and I don't have to care about it. The bottom one is AWS. What I usually find is when I need to start doing serious stuff, I usually jump over to one of the big boys. That's because I've got a lot of background and experience on them. But even at the entry level, $5 a month for a computer is very cheap in the grand scheme of things and all the costs you're going to have in your business. Even scaling it up, you've got to add a database and other bits and pieces on there. You start and go, right, well, if it costs me $50 a month for all the services I need, that's still reasonably priced. Pam's maybe for about spending $1,500 on a piece of paper, not discount the value of a contract. That's incredibly valuable. Just be aware of, let's go. Yes, the kids have just come home, so the dogs are going spare here. So apologies that my dog's making your dogs bark. It happens often. All right, let's talk about some real free stuff. AWS, Google, Microsoft all have startup programs. I would highly recommend that you gravitate towards one of these, get yourself signed up. You're going to get a couple of things. They're going to give you a bunch of credits to use towards compute. So that $5 a month is going to come off your pool of credits, so you're really not going to pay anything for a while. They're also going to provide you access to their architects who will come and have a look at your designs and saying, are you building stuff well? We spoke before about have you configured stuff well? When you're in the startup program with AWS, an AWS staff architect will come and look at your setup and make sure you're doing stuff right, that you haven't misconfigured something, that your backups are doing the right sort of backups at the right times. I had an example. I was talking to one of the AWS guys 2 days ago, and it's talking about how someone had thought they'd set their backups up for a daily snapshot. What they'd actually done is they set it up for hourly snapshots. So their bill was 24 times the size of what it needed to be because they were doing a full backup every hour. And of course, their performance was pretty terrible because while the backup's going on is trying to consume a whole bunch of resources. So the end user was getting every hour, the thing would slow down for 5 minutes and then come back up and then slow down and come back up. I was like, do that at 3 a.m. when no one's on your platform. Scale all your servers down after the backup until they come back online. An AWS architect will help you with that. Microsoft do the same thing. Google do the same thing. Part of being in their startup program is that you can sometimes leapfrog the in-between stage. When we talk about the MVP, disposable technology, spend as little as you can, get the learnings, then you want to start building and growing. When we start talking about hyperscaling, very large scale, you basically need to gravitate onto one of the 3 big players, unless you're looking for very niche services, at which point there's other providers that you'll already be in contact with anyway because of what they provide. Get onto one of these startup programs, get yourself signed up. They'll help you along the way. They'll give you a bunch of free credits. And most importantly, they'll give you some really good technical and architectural advice to make sure that what you're building is doing the right thing. And it's building at the right scale for the right price for what you need to do for your customers. You're probably also going to gravitate to either Google or Microsoft for your business systems. Everyone needs a business email, a domain name, basic, spreadsheets, PowerPoints and stuff like that. You're probably looking at Google and Microsoft. Zoho is another player in that space that will actually give you free business email hosting. Microsoft and Google will charge you for it, but you do get other stuff in that. They're probably someone to have a look at. From a tech product point, Atlassian is a very, very big player. They have 2 notable products. And once you start dealing with anyone in the tech space, you'll hear the word Jira mentioned very, very often. I don't know what their market share is, but it's going to be a big number. Jira is a platform for managing the technical requirements for how your product is built. It's how product owners, project managers, architects, business owners log information for developers to build stuff. Maurice, is that a fair explanation? I'm trying not to get too technical here.
Yes, agreed.
Yeah, they have a free plan. It's lovely. It'll get you through, I think, like your first 10 developers. Definitely have a look at that. Another good up-and-comer is Notion. They're actually a startup themselves. They're kind of trying to disrupt the space when it comes to business planning and managing workloads and a whole bunch of functionality. They have a program specifically for startups. They're a good one to have a look at. Web forms, they're kind of a very important thing. You need to get feedback, surveys, sign-ups, collect information. If you're not building it in your actual product, Google and Microsoft will give you the service for free. You just got to sign up with any email address and then you get access to their web forms product. If you're feeling amusing, what I like to do is use my Microsoft email address to sign up to Google Forms and use my Gmail to sign up to Office. Just keeps people on their toes, but that's how my humor goes. Auth0, we spoke about authentication and never ever store your customers' passwords in your own database or your own platform. Auth0 are a great global standard when it comes to managing users and authentication and passwords. They've got a free plan for your first 7,000 users, and then their pricing is actually pretty reasonable as it goes up from there. GitLab, we spoke before about managing code. GitHub and GitLab are probably 2 of the biggest players in the market. The thing I like about GitLab is it does code management and deployments from a single tool. I think we had a question before about what is CI/CD. So the CD stands for continuous deployment. You want to automate getting the code off your developers into your hosting environment without people having to manually copy files. It's the modern world. You can't take your site offline for an hour while you install the latest feature and then bring it back up and say, sorry, customers, you couldn't work for an hour. GitLab and the CI/CD platforms that it promotes allows you to do basically live deployments with zero downtime if you do it well. Again, they have a free plan. It will get you quite a way before you need to start paying. Stripe for credit card payments. PayPal, other providers, they all offer an entry-level plan where it's $0 per month and they just take a clip of the ticket on the top. Let's Encrypt, if wherever you're getting your service from doesn't provide you security for free out of the box, Let's Encrypt will give you free security certificates. So if you've ever gone to a website, you've noticed at the top it's HTTPS and there's the little padlock. That little padlock is your security certificate. And if someone wants to charge you for it, say, no, thanks, I'll just take it from Let's Encrypt. It's free, it's wonderful, it works. You should absolutely be doing it on anything and everything you ever build. Make sure there's an SSL certificate on it. Oh. Comment from the audience, Notion is great. Yes, it is. I've seen some lovely stuff built in Notion. Oh. Okay, that is the formal slides bits done. Yay! Now we can get into the real meat. So let's turn off the screen share. Let's have a look at the Q&A. And let's have a look, I suppose, the comments that have been coming in. And then what I want people to do is start thinking about how we can help you individually. So just scrolling back through the commentary.
Anthony, I've just shared that you're sharing your background. You haven't actually stopped the screen share.
Really? It does see us. Yeah, stop share.
Okay.
Oh, you all got to see my wallpaper. Lovely. There it is, and the screen all comes back to life. Oh, okay, so just in particular order, there's a question about CEU certificate training. I presume you're talking about continuous education. So when it comes to hiring, sorry, throat's failing again. Yes, people with degrees are often better qualified than people without. Don't let that stop you from hiring someone who gets your business and can deliver what you need them to deliver. It's interesting. I see more and more job ads where entry-level IT, they're asking for a master's degree. And I'm like, why? Bit of horses for courses. Honestly, I would take someone, but in a startup, honestly, I'd probably take a self-learner just as well as I take someone who's formally educated, someone who has the drive, someone who has the passion, someone who's really wants to be part of your business and will deliver value for the business. That's what you're looking for, not whether or not they've got the bachelor's degree in computer science or master's or whatever. Do they have some sort of proven experience in actually coding? If you're hiring a coder, that's what I'd be looking for. Have they coded in your programming stack, in your tech stack, in the last 6 to 12 months in some sort of a business environment? Yes, they've met the qualification. Right. Do they fit culturally into my business? Are they going to deliver value? Am I going to be able to work with them? Am I going to be able to communicate with them? Are they going to whinge every time I change my mind on something? Right? Can I work with this person? Is as big a question as do they have a degree or a certification? Scrolling down. Bureaucracy pervades every level. Yes, it does. When in a listed, minimum announceable product matters. Minimum marketable, minimum announceable are probably semi-interchangeable phrases. I suppose it's the difference between I have a small curated set of people that are using my platform versus I'm going out to the broad audience and I don't know all the people who are using it. Quite often when you're getting people for your MVB, you're reaching out to family, friends, contacts, even circles of people like this, that you kind of got an idea of the sort of people who are on your platform and they're giving you that feedback. When you go to market, when you announce, I am here, you're in a different space. Then we spoke about backup, multi-tenancy. Cool. Okay, as a non-tech founder, what sort of basic tech stack do I have to learn in order to hire software developers to work on our project? None. You're a business person. You're a company owner. You're a CEO. You're an MD. I work for a software engineering firm. Actually, it's probably a really bad example because both of our MDs are really hardcore old school techies, and honestly could probably outprogram pretty much everyone in the company. If I ignore the MDs and I look at the department heads, most of them couldn't code in a modern tech stack. Sorry to all the people who I work with. Some of them could, but most of them couldn't. As a non-tech person, come back to, can they explain it to me? If your programmer can explain how they're going to put this together and you understand it, they can communicate. And communicating with the people around you is just as important as your ability to write the code. We spoke about going with things like the AWS and Microsoft and the Google startup programs. They'll also give you some tech advice. They'll be your sanity check. I think we've got a question in the other tech about how do we find a tech co-founder or a CTO. At some point, you're going to want to get some sort of technical advisor into the management structure of your business. So, meetups are great for that. I'm sure, Kerry or some of the other hosts here would be able to point you towards some more, I call more social style activities where you can actually meet people who are interested in being tech advisors on the boards of startups or can help you get that first hire. But again, until you get to that point, and look, maybe it's the sort of point where if you can't find a developer who can talk to you, maybe you're not quite ready for a developer. Maybe you need a freelancer or an external company or some other way of getting that thing built, certainly early on. Happy to go into a bit of detail if you want to give a real example.
I might just add to that, Anthony, and draw a parallel towards that decision-making framework that I shared earlier on. One of the things that you do want to do is actually ensure that you're not in a situation where the person that you're engaging only has one approach to actually solve your particular problems. And to your point, Anthony, able to actually describe it in a way that you understand and can facilitate a decision in alignment to your actual business needs.
Yeah, I would add like two quick things to find co-founders that I've come across, if it's possible. One is Startup Victoria has set up a co-founder matching program. So they're having they have like weekly or monthly events to try and pair people together from tech and non-tech backgrounds. And also Y Combinator, which many of you might know of, is a famous American accelerator, has a co-founder matching program as well. And they run a thing called Startup School, which is a global program, and you could register for that. It's an online program, and that will give you access to the co-founder matching service. And they've just ramped it up very recently. So if you're lucky enough to grab a tech co-founder who's located in San Francisco, bombs away. So, yeah.
Well, thank you. Another comment that was in the other chat was, if there's such a shortage, and I think we're talking about the shortage of tech resources at the moment, why do we get bombarded with offers of website design and SEO? For two reasons. First off is that's what their business is. And they realized that there's probably a couple of aspects here. One is, in a post-COVID world, more and more businesses are going digital that have never been digital in the past. And so the competition in advertising for market share in the digital space right now is insane. So anyone who can offer SEO is selling it like crazy at huge markups, and they're making a great amount of money off it. The other one that I see quite often is we can build you a website for $600 and you'll have e-commerce capability. And I hear this one on the radio all the time, and it just makes me cry. I've been involved with some of these over time as to people have gone, yeah, I'll buy in on that. And it's a bit of the model that says, we'll get you in cheap, and then anything you want is an add-on cost. I had one, and not to share too much, my wife also works in user experience. She was helping out a very small company. They bought one of these things, and they said, cool, we want to know how many people are on our site. Is anyone using it? We went, well, that's easy. We just plug in Google Analytics. It's free, and off we go. And so we're like, where do I put in my Google Analytics code so that Google can start getting stats? And we looked through the tech, and we looked through all the support doc. We couldn't find. We called them up, and we said, well, how do we put in the GA code? We can't work out how to do it. They said, oh, you want that in? That's a $10 a month add-on. Like $10 a month so I can have analytics and know if anyone's on my site. Are you serious? And that was what their model was. They got you in on the cheap, and then anything you wanted started at $10 a month, and it stacked up. So we worked out that by adding on the basic things that this particular customer wanted, they were going to pay another $250 a month in add-on fees because they bought the cheap $700 e-commerce platform. So that's another example, I suppose, where maybe it wasn't free, but it was low cost SaaS, very quickly spiraled out of control. And it's like, you want to charge how much for all of that? That's insane. Now, that's a little while ago. Things have changed, but I see the same model come back over and over again. So yeah, read the fine print. Unfortunately, some of the fine print isn't even spelled out until you actually ask about it. You just presume, look, if I'm paying $700 for a basic e-commerce website that's out of the box, I didn't build anything, it's cookie cutter templated. Surely I have some way of knowing if anyone's using my site. Surely that's part of the offering. No.
Yeah.
Crazy stuff.
I might just add to that, Anthony, that what we've got at the moment is actually a skills shortage, I suppose, for skilled professionals in the tech industry. And a lot of those advertisements are actually not necessarily going to supply you with a skilled person, but a pre-canned product. So just to be cautious around what you're actually engaging on, and whether or not a pre-canned product actually suits your needs.
Well, I mean, another way that you can look for a tech founder, and I encourage people to do this, is to engage with people who are conducting research, in the IT departments at various universities, who are doing their masters and PhDs, because some of those individuals are very savvy and might be interested in participating in your startup, taking a seat at the table with you and becoming a co-founder. And they also might have the time to do so too.
Oh. Okay, so I'm kind of conscious of time, and we've done a bit of Q&A, but we haven't technically done the clinic section. And so what I'm going to do is put out a bit of a call. Who would like to put up their hands and share a little bit about what is blocking you in your tech at the moment? We had some people that start saying they got some scaling problems. Who'd like to do a little share, and we'll use you as a bit of a live case study, triaging, how can we help you style session? Do we have a volunteer? I'm putting everyone on the spot.
And we're very happy to stop the recording if you'd feel more comfortable talking about your business. So
absolutely.
Just ask you to do that if you want.
So yeah, feel free to leave out names of people or companies or providers, abstract it a little bit if you want. You don't have to get deep and personal. Yes, we can stop the recording. Obviously, the more specific you want to be, the better. But I'm happy to have a bit more of an abstract conversation as well. So who wants to come first? Come on, someone's got to step up.
I'll do it.
Great.
Lynn,
Thanks,
virtual
Lynn.
t-shirt for you. Thank you very much for being first.
Sorry, the phone was going off at the same time as the. Yeah, okay. So I just run a very, very small business, and I have a website which I developed myself through WordPress, and I get the updates, and I try to. I'm trying to link in sales. It's a farm that I run, and I'm trying to set up a farm shop, both in person and online. And I have trouble integrating the website and the email system that I've got. I've got a paper system that collects people's email addresses, and just integrating MailChimp or whatever the other one is that I'm looking at, trying to integrate those. And I don't know whether that's too simple for this forum, because you've lost me on a whole lot of stuff tonight. so I apologise in advance if that's too basic, but I also have it in my mind that I want to set up a cooperation with other farm gates to set up a QR coding kind of system. And that's why I asked the question about the Salesforce integration, because if Salesforce can develop me an app, I wanted to know what the security of my database is versus some other farm gate down the road who might want to tap into I've already got quite an extensive database. So that's IP in my
Absolutely. Can I ask a random question? You talk about having a farm business. Can I ask what sort of produce you're actually making and selling?
Hemp.
Okay. So you're on the government supplier space, or are you doing it from the other angle, from the...
No, I separately run a hemp a representative body, a hemp association. And I am trying to promote hemp from the perspective of educating consumers about what it's all about, and educating farmers about how to grow it. So tackling the market from both ends and single-handedly.
No problems. I suppose I was trying to work out whether you're coming from the medicinal side or from the raw properties from, the other uses from hemp.
Non-drug, non-medicinal.
Non-medicinal, yeah.
Although, tomatoes are medicinal. Mushrooms are medicinal.
Yeah. Tomatoes are part of the deadly nightshade family, which is why I'm allergic to.
Yeah, well,
You've hit a soft spot there.
Yeah.
I suppose just to start a little bit of depth in terms of your specific challenge. In terms of the shop aspect or the commerce aspect of what you're actually trying to put together, have you looked at WooCommerce at all in order to provide some of the functionality specifically on WordPress?
Thank you. Yes, I've downloaded the app. That's as far as I've got. It's the whole thing scares me.
Yes, and one of the considerations that I've been thinking about whilst you've been talking is it feels very much so that you're actually starting to get into your differentiator and aspects of IP that you're actually going to build, which may actually be part of a trigger to start engaging a professional in regards to being able to build up that unique IP. So whilst you've got website that you're actually housing, and you're potentially going to build up some commerce around that. I believe the basic the basic outcomes that you're actually seeking is realistically where you're going to differentiate around your particular product. And so would recommend that as you're actually getting into that level of complexity, that may actually be the trigger to start engaging a professional.
Can I ask, what are you using for farm gate sales as far as like an actual stock management sales platform? Yeah.
Not a lot. What I produce is just produced on farm, my own product, and I, supply is a challenge, which is a challenge for any farm producer, because until you scale up, you don't have security of so it's a seasonal thing, and then you run out and people still want to buy it, and you're into that kind of realm.
Yeah.
But I have been trying to develop the awareness of hemp by running a bed and breakfast operation on the side. So people come in, they see they stay in a hemp cottage, which has got hemp walls and hemp sheets on the bed and hemp soap in the bathroom, blah, blah, blah. And they do a farm tour and they give them a talk and whatever. But that's just 2 by 2, it's just couples every weekend. And I've got to
you got to start small.
Yeah.
I suppose what I was also
leveraging social network capability in terms of being able to actually aid in that cause.
Yep. I've got Instagram, Facebook. Yeah, I don't do TikTok or anything like that. It's enough to be keeping up with Instagram and Facebook, to be honest. But
yeah. Okay, so probably a bit of general advice. I would have a look at the bits of tech you've got at the moment. We've called out WordPress, MailChimp. Be interested to know, do you have a credit card reader or something like that, a point of sale system that you use in the farm shop? Is there any sort of software attached to that? Are you not quite at that stage yet?
Yep. No, I've been doing farmers markets and I use Square. But the integration, I don't understand how to capture who pays me on Square to get them into my database. I don't know how to do that.
I think that's almost the leap that you now need to take, is to say that some of these disparate systems are going to need to be replaced with something that provides a more of an integrated solution. So I think Maurice said, WooCommerce as one of the options. I'd say even have a look at something like Shopify. They do provide I suppose an array of services around that, and there are plugins for WordPress if you want to keep your WordPress, but they also offer the equivalent functionality, so you can host the whole website on there. But they'll also then give you the integrations of the credit card reader, the online sales, the inventory management, and some of more of that business management stuff behind the scenes. So, because if someone's online ordering something and the system thinks you've got stock and they pay for it, the worst customer experience is say, oh, whoops, sorry, I didn't actually have that. I've got to refund you. And then they get disappointed and you've lost a customer. So inventory management is almost as important to the online shop as having the online shop itself. But that then leads into your on-farm purchases. So how do you manage your on-farm purchases? Can you have a single platform that will actually manage them both for you?
Well, I get all of that. I absolutely get all of that. And Square manages that for me. Shopify does not. Facebook does not. Marketplace does not. Because why? They've got a thing against hemp. They will not allow me to advertise anything to do with hemp.
Oh.
Even I was talking to somebody else in the industry today, and they can't advertise hemp clothing because they get blocked from these platforms. So
wow.
Righto, so we've hit one of the walls of scaling. Providers who have great tech won't allow us to use their tech because they're afraid of clothing. Crazy world we live in. Pam, over to you.
Can you smoke your shirt? Can you smoke your shirt? That's a very common question.
I know.
Yeah. I think, this is an interesting one because the hemp that you're talking about isn't really problematic anyway. It's just an ancient fibre which there has been used for thousands of years, in matting and all sorts of other things.
It's in their heads, and I've argued this time and again with Facebook. I go over and over again, and I every time I try and advertise on Marketplace or Facebook, I argue the thing, they block me.
Lynn, I think we'll take this conversation offline because I have a few solutions that we can talk about. And
sorry to take over.
No, it's a great little case study.
Well, I do have one suggestion, and it's kind of a sneaky one, and it may be a kind of renaming activity.
That's
and
exactly
Kerry,
right.
That's exactly what you're thinking. Yes,
it's about and we've had to do that with one of our products too.
Okay, fantastic. So Kerry knows the answer to this, and it's along the lines that I'm thinking as well. Probably
we'll have a chat, Lynn,
this is
about
a way
that.
to solve it, Lynn. So Kerry will help you out with that.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so
probably add a couple of things very, very briefly. In terms of solving some of the problems, it's probably good to actually split them up a little bit more and solve one at a time rather than trying to solve them all at once. And then a bit of tech advice to add, and it may actually get a little bit more complex, but general system integration is normally handled by exporting the information from one system and then importing it into another system. And that normally can actually take place through computer code, but without computer code, most systems will allow you to export your information back out into something like Excel and then import that back into the other system by importing that Excel file. And so I would actually look to maybe in the short term, trying to get some of the integration through export and import. And hopefully that helps you a little bit on at least one of those problems that isn't quite as large. Cheers.
Now we do have another question on the chat box, Anthony, from Bree.
Okay, how do you know when you move from a Shopify platform to engaging a developer? Oh, as in you're outgrowing Shopify? Where's Bree?
Hello, here I am.
There we go. Can you give us a 30-second elevator pitch of who are you, what is your business, and what are you hitting?
Well, I'm an absolute noob, so I haven't even started the website of it. It's still in idea and concept form. But I've come up with a DIY home mural kit, so people will buy the kit and then go home and do a mural at their own home over the weekend and so on. But there would be different sorts of kits for different sorts of groups, different sorts of add-ons and so on. So would this be something that would work in a Shopify Squarespace environment, or would I be better off going straight to someone who can make a not cookie cutter type?
I would say, look, when you're starting out and you're small and you're not sure of your volumes of sales and stuff, definitely start at a Shopify, Square, ShareTribe, BigCommerce, any of those good, known sort of online shop e-commerce providers.
Yeah.
They're a great way of starting in, getting some learnings, understanding how these platforms work, even behind the scenes, so that when your business grows, then you can start to make a decision about, if we take Shopify, for example, it gives you a bunch of functionality out of the box. And then you can pay for add-ons and bolt-ons, and a whole heap of third parties have made functionality that plugs into Shopify.
Yeah.
I was working with a very small not-for-profit, and they've got some stuff they sell, but they also run events. They want to sell tickets. Now, Shopify doesn't do tickets naturally, but there's a plugin for it, and you just pay whatever dollars per month, and you just plug it in, and today you can now have ticket functionality on Shopify, right? And I'm just using that as an example, but maybe there's something you want that it doesn't do naturally. Mm-hmm. You can engage a developer to build that functionality for Shopify.
All right.
Yeah,
okay.
And then you can have that functionality exclusively for you, or you could then put that functionality back in the marketplace and sell it to other people if it's also generic functionality. So that could be a little side hustle for you. Not that this is advice. Do we need to put a disclaimer that none of this is advice? I'm not endorsing any of these platforms. I'm not affiliated with any of these platforms. I don't get any kickbacks from any of these platforms. Please do your own research. Pam, has that covered it?
Yes.
Yeah, well, that's a good reservation. But I have a quick question for you, Anthony, just a qualification here. How does Shopify compare with Wix in your experience? Because Wix can also be a shop front as well. And I've used it
Oh, sorry.
for that purpose myself.
I'll say, Maurice, you go.
No, that's okay. So it comes back down to their general heritage. So Wix's heritage was actually more around a very easy to use DIY type of platform to enable broad spectrum of websites that may or may not contain commerce. Shopify actually came into the market with a lot more specificity around being able to actually conduct e-commerce types of transactions, and that's where I suppose some of the difference lies. In terms of some of the queries that you shared, Bree, one of the considerations that I've got is whether or not running an experiment would actually help your cause. And so if you would actually think about, there are a couple of different options that you could take there. It would be quite advantageous, because you're actually aiming to embark on some of this yourself, that you actually maybe spend a day just going through and familiarizing yourself and seeing if you can actually achieve a basic outcome with a chosen platform. And then at the end of that, actually making a bit of an assessment around your ability to actually achieve the outcome that you're wanting to generate. And then that's actually going to help inform you as to whether or not you're going to exceed what you could do regardless of the choice. And again, maybe engaging a professional in that regard. But equally, you'll find that one of the platforms you'll personally be able to actually, I suppose, gain enough intuition to actually generate the outcomes that you're seeking yourself.
Now, do you mean, sorry, go.
Sorry, please.
So do you mean actually go on to and investigate the different platforms, or look for sites that use those platforms?
No. Go in, because your intent is for you to actually be able to create that, from what I understood. And so go in, sign up. Normally it's a 5 or 10 minute process to sign up and start creating something. Give yourself, I suppose, a day or a period of time that makes sense for you to actually just assess and measure whether or not you're actually finding it comfortable enough to navigate through and create the outcome that you're seeking. A basic shop in those platforms shouldn't be beyond, I suppose, a little bit of digital savvy, do-it-yourself type of approaches. But it's all going to come back down to how well you relate personally to the interface, because you're going to almost learn as you go. Yeah. And so that's why I think if you actually go through and run some of those experiments yourself, you'll best inform whether or not you'll get to a position of being able to achieve the overall outcome you're seeking.
So Maurice and Anthony, a quick question to you. I know from using the Wix platform that it's part and parcel of the platform is that you can access developers who understand Wix and are listed in the context of the platform. So I'm wondering whether Shopify has a link to developers as well.
Yeah, they all do that.
They all have a
Yeah.
marketplace.
Yeah.
But all the people in I call it the top 10 list, they've all got a similar sort of thing. They've all got a marketplace, and they've all got, other companies who can advertise themselves in that marketplace as being, I'm a gold platinum coated with whatever partner, and I know the platform inside and out. They all do pretty much the same model. I think Maurice's idea is very good. I think if you remember way back in the slides, Maurice presented a template called a options paper, which had 3 columns. And you'd essentially say, look, I've done a quick Google and here's 3 that kind of look good for me. And I quickly want to jot in the high level things that matter to me and how they differ between the 3. So you might say, righto, what do I get for my basic dollars per month? What are the key features that I get that matter to me? And just see if there becomes a real clear winner. And then I would literally look, they all offer a 14-day free trial. Say, can I build a shop in 2 hours? Or how much of a shop can I build in 2 hours? And if you can't get started and feel like you're making progress inside 2 hours, you're probably not on the right one for you. So just jump on to the next one. Spend 2 hours on that one. Just do one each night for 3 nights. Spend a couple of hours. Just see if you can hack together a shop in their platform. You start off, you pick a theme, you say what sort of products, you load a couple of products into your inventory, you set some pricing, you do it all without actually releasing it to the public. You can actually mock up a store really fast. Okay, if I can mock that up in a couple of hours, especially as a non-tech savvy person, I'm making great progress on my business without spending money on developers. Yes, I'm spending a monthly fee, but nothing professional comes without a monthly fee. Once you're selling customers, the monthly fee should disappear really fast. And that needs to be part of your business plan. You need to be making sure that you're getting towards a cash flow positive position as quickly as you can. And sometimes that means you just outsource a bunch of stuff. You pay the monthly fee and you make little profit for a while until you've got enough of a business and you can understand truly the nuances of what your customer wants and how to make their experience optimized. And that's where you start investing in tech seriously.
Just to supplement, maybe consider back to the previous content, avoid the big build. So I can't help but feel that you're almost sitting in a position where you feel that you've only got one chance at this and you want to get it all right. Open up a little bit of vulnerability, because chances are you'll actually go through that cycle a couple of times, and it will be through that cycle that you'll actually gain all of the most valuable learnings to then promote to an action or an activity that you'll formally build. Just consider that you may actually need to actually go through this particular process.
So further questions?
I feel like I should be ringing a bell. Last call for drinks.
Come on. Venetia is sort of sitting.
Yes, she's unmuted.
Go on.
Venetia, go for it.
I didn't have any business here. I just finished my master's. And I'm here to understand how the businesses are working here. We have a business back in India, the small businesses. So I just want to understand and compare how the things are going on here and there.
Thank you for that.
I think there's been a lot on this evening, and whilst they haven't been actively asking questions or participating, I think they're soaking up it's like hearing things over and over again, and gradually it seems to seep in a little bit of understanding about the terminology, and it's just such an incredible topic to tackle. The exciting part about tech is if we can get our head around it and manage it, it opens up all sorts of possibilities for starting a business, growing a business, scaling it up, and you can live and work out in regional Victoria and central Victoria. You can't get any better place to live and work than in Central Victoria, and that's why we like to support these workshops, these chats. And tech is the big thing that trips us all up, even those of us that have been working with it for years. And I do commend our next meetup chat with some small business owners who have been struggling with tech years ago, gone through several reincarnations, and have the wealth of hindsight now and can give a little bit of practical advice from a user point of view. So that is on our website, on our events page, if anyone's interested in coming along and listening to that. But I have to say that the wealth of knowledge we have had in the room tonight with Anthony, Maurice and Pam, it's, you know, you've done a sterling job. And I really do thank you for plowing through all that information. And we're very grateful. I've had a few messages of people with kids needing their bedside stories have had to leave, and they're going to catch up. They've said really enjoying it, coming back to watch the second half of the recordings. So they have valued it, and they apologise that they couldn't stick with us till the end. But no, thank you very, very much, all of you. Thank you, Lauren from the Trobe, who is our wonderful supporter. We love you to death, Lauren. Thank you, Catherine Clines, for helping to connect us with uSpark. We do love all these connections, and La Trobe's presence in the region has been very helpful to Startup Centre Victoria and all the people that are looking to do better. So thank you so much, everyone. And please reach out to me if there's anything else we can assist you with in Central Victoria, and come and visit us. If you don't live in the area, come and visit. All right. Good night, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.